Hey, Archeo heads. Let's talk about Poverty Point. For those of you that don't know, Poverty Point is an archaeological site in the bayous of northern Louisiana. At its heart is a pyramid that was built in 1400 BCE. I feel justified in calling it a pyramid because of its gigantic size. It covers an area of 12 football fields, and as it slopes up to its top, it's 72 feet tall today. And we're pretty sure that it was more like 100 or more feet tall in its original form. It has had 3,000 years of melting. It's made out of earth, but it's gigantic. It is truly a pyramid. Now, the site is exciting just because of that pyramid, but there's a lot of other cool things about it. I want to give you a highlight reel of the things that I think are the most interesting besides that giant pyramid in the middle of Louisiana. The first thing that really grabs you when you see a map of Poverty Point is the overall site layout. Yes, in the heart is that giant pyramid, but right in front of it are these giant earthen ridges, and they stretch in kind of arcs, 6 arcs in front of the pyramid. They're on flat ground, but they're wide. It looks like an amphitheater, the shape of it does from the sky, but it's a half a kilometer wide. And when archaeologists dug into these ridges that are about 2 meters high originally each, what they got is not seats, but little houses. Hundreds of them that are all on top of those ridges. So we have this population living on top of these very formal ridges. And those ridges and the plaza that they make between them was built at 1700 BCE. There was all sorts of burnt plant material in the base as they prepared the flat plaza and the place for the ridges. So we're pretty sure 1700 BC is when it was made. There are also other mounds at Poverty Point. The big pyramid is called Mound A, but we also have B, C, D, and E. Of those remaining ones, B and E are the biggest. Mound B is 6 meters tall, so about the size of a 2-story building. But at its conical base, it's 50 meters across, so a big building. And it lies 625 meters north of the big pyramid Mound A. Mound B was built in 1700 BCE, and Mound E was built in 1500. So both of them were older than Mound A. But the neat thing when we look at all three of them is they're not just in a north-south line. It's a perfect north-south line. And from E to B, we're talking about a whole kilometer. So it's clear evidence of early astronomy and basic survey skills. It could not have been a coincidence that these things stretching for a whole kilometer were accidentally perfectly north-south. This is basic engineering skills at 1500 BCE. Now, how about the people of Poverty Point? Well, we know that a lot of them were living on those big arc-shaped ridges. There were houses all along those ridges. There were also houses spreading out along the Bayou Macon, right in front of the big plaza where those ridges sit. Collectively, we think that at least by 1300 BCE, there were 5,000 people living in Poverty Point. And there's no ceramics, and there's no evidence of major agriculture. These were basically hunter-gatherer people. We believe that they were able to subsist based on the abundance of shellfish and fish inside the Bayou Macon. There were no ceramics, but there was kind of a proto-version. It was hard-baked clay. And they didn't make ceramics out of it, but in each one of those little houses that we find kind of a cooking basin, like a little pot. It's dug into the earth, and there's a clay hardened lining. So if you poured water in there, it would stay in there and you could boil it. And we find these little cooking balls that they were throwing inside normal temperature water to heat it up, probably to cook fish and shellfish. But to the frustration of archaeologists, the nature of the soil perhaps, or maybe just another burial pattern, we don't have any skeletons. We have a few pieces that we think were perhaps cremations found, but there are no skeletons to really look at the physical characteristics of the people that lived at and made Poverty Point. Now, how about artifacts and trade at Poverty Point? As I said, they are pre-agricultural and there's no ceramics. So those kind of typical artifacts and evidence of subsistence, we don't have them. The area of the Bayou Macon also does not have a lot of good stone materials for stone tools. And we can clearly see that the stuff that they do have, which is literally tons, was imported from someplace far away. The closest sources we can see are Arkansas. But then there's also chert and other materials from Indiana. Those areas make up most of the stone tools, the sources for the stone. They also make these interesting soapstone bowls, like bowls that are carved out of soft stone. And that kind of soft stone, we know that it only comes from the Appalachian Mountains, probably in the area of Georgia, where there's also very early evidence of human settlements. Not pyramids, but they're definitely trading with those people. Now, they were also making pieces of art and jewelry, and some of that was made out of copper. And the copper that it's made of is known to have come from the Great Lakes. So there's a lot of artifacts that archaeologists call exotics. When they're not from the local area, it's an exotic artifact. And we have not just a few at Poverty Point, but we have a collective 77 tons of foreign material dug up at the site of Poverty Point. That's a lot of trade. And the weird thing is, it seems to only go one way. We don't really find artifacts from Poverty Point at those faraway locations that they must be trading with. And we would find it because Poverty Point made its own kind of odd little artifacts that are very diagnostic for the site. We call them Poverty Point objects. Poverty Point objects are these little hard-fired clay balls. They're about the size of a golf ball. We believe that they were heating them up in fires and then throwing them into their little cooking pots that were also clay-lined in order to boil water and cook. Now, just at Poverty Point, we've found tens of thousands of these objects, but they're also in a radius around Poverty Point. The whole region has a culture that we call simply the Poverty Point culture, but those balls are also found there. It's one of the reasons we can connect different sites is by this very diagnostic artifact, and we don't find them outside of this Poverty Point culture region. And that Poverty Point culture region is pretty wide. It goes far to the north into this Yazoo Basin. It's over into the state of Mississippi, all the way down to the coast of Mississippi and Louisiana. That's where we find similar dated things, these Poverty Point objects. And really, we've only begun to scratch the surface of how many of these sites there are. So I hope that Louisiana gets the support they need to dig more of these sites and really expound upon what we know about Poverty Point culture. Another very abundant artifact type we find at Poverty Point are little pieces of art. We find them in various kinds of stone. Oftentimes there are carved little animal totem or something. We also find them making art out of that hard-fired clay. Sometimes it's those simple little balls, but they also make things that look like dice with little dots and marks on them. There's all sorts of things made out of both clay and stone that are clearly art. And at this early time, there's a lot of significant things that we can say just about the appearance of art. Number one, they're thinking about their world and they're envisioning it in art form. One could also argue that there's a certain diversification of labor that happens once you start making art. Not everybody's just hunting and gathering. Some people are artists now. It's interesting that the art is found all over the site too, so we don't think that we should argue that rich people there are controlling workers and that they're getting the majority of these art, jewelry, high quality things. It's all over the site, which denotes a certain very typical egalitarian nature of society, the kind that we'd see in hunter-gatherer societies, not necessarily organized chiefdoms or states. Still a lot of egalitarian evidence at Poverty Point, which I think is very interesting. There are also sites that are older than Poverty Point in the same region doing not as spectacular things, but much earlier. One of them's Watson Break. It's just a few dozen miles to the south, and it is a mound site. Instead of having a big pyramid, it's got kind of raised ridges of earthworks, and they form kind of a donut shape with a plaza in the middle. Now, it is way older than Poverty Point. And while it's doing similar things to Poverty Point in the similar region, one big difference is that we don't find those Poverty Point objects. Those little hard circular balls to boil water, they're not there. But the basins still are, and instead of using the little clay balls, they're using just heated up gravel. So it's neat. At Poverty Point, we have those balls. But at Watson Break, we have them cooking in a similar way, but they haven't invented cooking balls yet. The dates of Watson Break are much older than Poverty Point. They go from 2800 BCE all the way back to 3500 BCE, so over 1,000 years older. Then there's the Lower Jackson Mound. It sits 1.8 kilometers north of Poverty Point. And again, it's way older. In the case of Jackson Mound, the dates are coming back 3600 to 3900 BCE. Now, it's not very big. It's about 3 meters tall. It's about 35 meters across. So it's a small mound, but definitely man-made and definitely well dated. And the neat thing about it is it's exactly north of Poverty Point. Again, it lines up with that line within the site that's Mound B, Mound A, and Mound E. But now this one is 1.8 kilometers north, straight north. Now, logically speaking then, that would mean that the people that made Poverty Point knew where Jackson Mound was, and they surveyed from there down into this new location and made sure that they maintained that north-south line. Again, surveying. One more even older site is amusingly found right in the middle of the LSU campus in Baton Rouge. There are two big mounds that they used to do like tailgating parties around, but then they discovered that those were also from before 3000 BCE. In fact, recent studies are now suggesting that at the very bottom of it, there's more like Paleolithic things, more like 11,000. Now, nothing like that has been found in other parts of that deep south area. So at the moment, I still think that's an enigma. I'd like to see someone replicate that result somewhere else. I'd feel better that it was actually a mound at 11,000 BC. It's entirely possible that it just planted itself on a Paleolithic site without a mound, so the vote's still out on that one. Now, I imagine some of you hearing this for the first time are finding it hard to believe. Maybe you think I'm exaggerating or I'm flat out lying just to get some clicks. But in the case of Poverty Point, it's actually there and you can actually visit it. It's a wonderful site. I've been there myself 5 or 6 times, and I really enjoy visiting, and I'm impressed by its scale. The rangers there are wonderful folks. They're happy to see you, and they'll even give you a guided tour of the site. And you will see for yourself that there's actually a pyramid standing in Louisiana. And now you know how much more there is still to discover out there in Louisiana. If you do decide to go to the site, tell the Rangers Ed sent you. If you like what I do, please consider supporting me through Patreon. YouTube's ad revenue model sucks. You have to put up with clicking through weird commercials, and creators always get a pittance of the actual revenue. So let's not do that. Patreon is really a much more direct way to support the kind of content that you value. For just $5 a month, you can keep me in this chair instead of out there trying to make a living some other way. I am as cheap as a cup of coffee and considerably less bitter. My Patreon is actually linked to my podcast, ArchaeoEd, which if you haven't heard that, you might like that too. But here's the link right here to my Patreon through ArchaeoEd. I'll also put it in my show notes. Thanks for watching. If you liked that, you might like these other two videos. Give them a try.